Our first speaker today claims that to him it isn't cycling in itself that matters the most. Yet he calls himself the cycling professor. That sounds rather ironic, I think. Marco ter Brommerschroet, Associate Professor at University of Amsterdam and Founding Academic Director of the Urban Cycling Institute, wants to emphasize that we should change the way we talk about cycling and bicycles. In that sense, the cycling professor feels more like a linguistic researcher than an urban planner. Maybe that is why he wants us to see cycling and cyclists like swarms of starlings instead of pure and hardcore means of transportation. He invites us to dance in these swarms, just for the fun of it. My first instinct then is to ask, do we really have the time to dance our way from A to B? When everything we do in our daily life is about efficiency and deadlines, and we have no time to waste. Just give me half an hour, and I will convince you to slow down, he told me when we spoke some time ago. That is exactly what we're going to do here now. We're going to give Marco ter Brommerschroet the time to convince us to spend more time on our bikes, redefining the use of public space. So please give him a warm welcome, Marco ter Brommerschroet.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I want to make a deal with you with the room here. It's very early in the morning, and the deal is very simple. I can do two things. I can give the entire presentation in Dutch, or we can have a deal and we come up with a lingua franca, a language that we can use, that we all speak in sort of the second language fashion, English. Is that okay?
Yes.
So let's do that. Because what is language, actually? So that's the first thing that we need to discuss. What is language? Why am I going to talk about language? I think language, very simplistic, I'm not a linguistic expert, but language is sort of a set of words, of sounds even, that we agree upon so that we can communicate with each other. And if we agree upon the same type of language, we can actually share ideas and even, ideally, develop joint ideas. And if we don't agree on that, you would be looking half an hour to a person just hissing and puffing and making sounds in a very Dutch fashion, and it wouldn't make a lot of sense. So language is very important, and the deal we make here to use English as language is also very important, because it will, in the end, decide the quality of the ideas we will develop together today. But, and this is the main point already, is these choices we make in using a certain language, they are always, by definition, simplistic. So having a language with words, you can never fully describe reality. You have to make certain choices. And this painting exemplifies that for me. Because this is the same painting, we're all looking at the same painting, but some of you are looking at a general, while others are looking at a woman and a man standing under a gate with a dog either sleeping or dead, I don't know. There's a dog in the picture. And we need to realize that if we look at reality in this way, we make a certain choice, and now that I told you, many of you are able to switch it, but if you call this painting a general, you would definitely see something different than if you would call this painting two people that meet under a gate. So it's very important to be aware of the language we speak, because it defines the mirror we use to look at reality. So it defines what we see and what we do not see. So that's the first element. But it gets even worse. Because language is performative. The language that we use, and especially the professional language that I want to talk with you about today, so the language that you use as professionals, talking about, for instance, cycling, is not only a mirror of reality, it defines what kind of reality we are making, what kind of futures we are making, what kind of problems we see, and what kinds of solutions we see. So it is a very powerful, we need to, I think, understand it as a crucial tool to see the reality we see around us and how it got developed, what the language is that's underlying it, what are the concepts, what are the metaphors, what is the jargon that we use that led to the reality out there. But more fundamentally today, it's a positive talk, so I want to give it to you as a weapon. So after this talk, I hope that you can see that using language in a very reflective way is actually a very powerful weapon to wield if you're talking with other politicians to make certain decisions. So, as said, my name is Marco de Bommelsvloet, and I first want to thank the Dutch Embassy and the organizers of this great event to invite me here and to being able to allow me to share my ideas on this with you. What I want to do today is I want to tell you a story about how I think language plays an important role in thinking about mobility in general, and how cycling can be the ideal platform to challenge this language. So our joint trip today starts at a very boring Dutch intersection, which is probably the most boring thing I could ever show to a Dutch audience. But I'm interested in also what you think. And it ends with neurobiology, so I'm going to take you through some steps. So let's go. Here it is. So I said, for a Dutch audience, this might be the most boring picture ever. Like, what is this? This is an intersection. But what we find is that the delegations that come to Amsterdam find this one of the most interesting things. They almost see this as a holy grail. So maybe somebody in the room can tell me why he or she thinks this is so interesting. What do you see here?
Nice bike lanes.
Nice bike lanes. Yeah.
No bikes.
No bikes. The holy grail, no bikes. Why is this so interesting? Why is the Dutch model so interesting? Nice bike lanes, is that all? Can be a bit more profound again, I think. Separation. Yeah. That's maybe the most important thing that I see as well. And it's not only separation in space, it's also separation in time. And I'll get back to that. Because what I think is this is seen as a holy grail, but I call this a Faustian deal that the Dutch made to get to a success of cycling. We basically sold our soul to the devil. It's a bit of an overstatement, but I will explain later why I think in this way. So it was all for me started out because one of the problems of being Dutch is that you are growing up in this culture of cycling, so it becomes so ingrained in who you are that it's very hard to actually observe it. That's what sociologists call the Dutch national habitus, and they call this, they describe it as something, and habitus is something not reflected upon, so we don't see it anymore, just there. But one journalist 5 years ago asked me to stand outside of an intersection. At that time, I already biked 40,000 kilometers within the city of Amsterdam to my work alone. So that's one time around the world. But it was the first time that I stepped outside of that situation. And we just stood there and I started to observe. So what do you see if you look at these cyclists at this road? We had the luck that the traffic lights were broken at that morning. So there were no traffic lights. So we just saw sort of the chaos that was around us. So what did we see? So what I saw was actually a theater, a stage, where I entered every morning. And actually when I entered it, I'm completely relaxed, but at the same time very focused. So I'm on my bike, on my way to my first coffee. You can feel it, I think, right? So you enter the stage. At that moment, within a split second, I'm aware of everybody at the stage. I know all the other cyclists, where they are. I know their speeds. I know their intentions from their body language. I know all the amount of car drivers that I can see. I know even the colors of their number plates. Because if it's blue, it's a taxi, and I have to do something different. I know the cycle of the traffic light. All this information in a split second. And I use this information to directly steer my behavior. So I give a little bit of a nudge to the left, or maybe I speed up a little bit to get the green light. And I leave the stage at the other side. And I go to the next stage. And behind me, this game continues. And what we found, what was very interesting in this, is that although we saw this game happening in front of us, we saw these people behave and dance in this way, we also saw that the Dutch infrastructure was not designed in a way to coordinate this behavior. Almost the opposite. It was blocking people from actually doing the dance. They had to go around certain parts of the infrastructure. It's very micro-designed. So they were actually blocked. And what we found is that the infrastructure itself was not designed for a swarm of starlings, it was designed for a flock of geese. Big birds that really need clarity. You can imagine if this first bird decides to go right suddenly, it's mayhem, it's chaos, that cannot happen. So these birds actually need clarity, they need clear rules so they can cover large distances with a minimal loss of energy. And if you look at this, the average bird makes sense. You can look at a goose and see the average goose. You can design infrastructure for it. And you make sure that the rules around this behavior are clear and that the infrastructure supports this. And this was actually the logic we saw in the infrastructure. So we saw a sort of a mismatch between the behavior of the cyclists, which were dominating at that intersection, and the way it was designed. Because this is how it was designed. This is not designed from the logic of interaction, of dancing together as a stage. This is designed from the logic, and this is called in Dutch sustainable safety. And it became world famous, an overwhelming success. But I think it's mainly an overwhelming success because this is giving an example of how you can give cyclists space, dedicated space, within a car-dominated environment. And actually it follows the same logic as the car logic. It separates everything, it makes everything very clear, it organizes rules. All interactions between traffic are organized, so you don't have to solve them yourself. There are traffic lights everywhere, so you don't meet each other. So although it gives cycling a very strong, dominant role in the car-dominated society, I think this is exactly the deal that we make with the devil, because there's a logic underlying this, and I think we're not well aware of how this logic was adopted to reach this goal. In Dutch context, and I think also in many contexts here, especially in a city like Oslo, you would see places where cyclists and pedestrians no longer are dominated by car traffic, but it's the other way around. So this offers us the potential to see how this language stops functioning, how it breaks down, but also it might give us the opportunity to develop an alternative language. And with an alternative language, we can also make an alternative future. So can cycling help us to develop it? Well, first we need to understand what is actually the language underlying this. Well, that language is very simple again, but it starts with the idea that mobility is always a hybrid between humans and technology. Always. Even walking, you need some technology to do that. And traffic engineering and the way we design space, they looked at a very specific hybrid, because traffic engineering is mainly a response to the emergence of the car in our cities. And as a result, the domain looked especially to this hybrid of the car and the person. And what you see here is that 85% of this hybrid is the technology. And that's actually ideal from the perspective of developing knowledge around it, because you can minimize the role of the human. And that's actually what we see all around us. It's already 15%, but most innovations try to minimize it even further to even 0% in a self-driving car. And this allowed us to do something magical. It allowed us to sort of simplify the human element in this hybrid. So this allowed us to look at this person in the hybrid, on average, being a homo economicus. So a selfish person that wants to utilize or maximize his or her own utility. And this utility is derived from going from point A, it's already said by in the introduction, going from point A to point B. And the idea behind this is that this is where the utility comes from, and everything in between is called a disutility. So mobility is a cost. It's time, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of comfort, and you do it only because you want to reach another place. So mobility is a disutility. It's something that you want to minimize, and ideally, and that's what if you read everything that Elon Musk is saying, ideally he's sort of embracing this logic. Ideally, we want to minimize it to zero. That's the idea. That's what's being sold by the self-driving car, where mobility time becomes irrelevant because you can do other stuff. This is sold by the Hyperloop, this is sold by the Boring Company, and so on and so forth. And it's even sold in in many of the mobility commercials, if this evening you're watching television and you look at a car commercial, you will see this is what's being sold to us. It's the idea that we think that mobility is a disutility that we want to minimize, preferably to zero. I call this the utopia of seamless mobility. The idea that there is a future where mobility is completely seamless and we can really optimize our own utility. Well, it's wrong. It's a nice idea, but it's wrong. And economists already know this for ages. Traffic engineers are still trying to figure this out. There's a lot of data that shows that it's wrong. And this is one example from a Dutch study. On the left you see 1950. And in 1950, the Dutch spent about 1.5 hours a day on mobility. It's all the way on the left. And then we started 60, 70 years of spending billions of euros on travel time savings, with this idea that if we build roads, if we extend roads, if we make trains faster, we can actually save this travel time and people can use it in a different way. So I take you all the way to the right, 2010, and the Dutch still spend on average 1.5 hours traveling. So we spent 60 years, billions of euros, and the result is that we saved 0 seconds of travel time. How can that happen? Apparently, people have a travel time budget. They are willing to spend 1.5 hours a day, on average, on being mobile. So it's not something that they want to reduce to zero, it's something that they use to reach other purposes. And instead what we did is we created a sort of centrifugal force that pushes everybody out. All the activities are spread across space. So in 1950, the accessibility, the things that you could reach within acceptable travel time, are exactly the same as in 2010, but now you need a car. You can no longer reach it by foot or by bike. Whoa, that's the problem, right? That's the problem of the underlying logic and accepting this idea that there is something like seamless travel in the future. There is no such thing. And it also explains that if we take this logic and look to cycling, it explains a lot of the frustration and anger that you read in a newspaper all day, that you probably also experience in your daily lives. This idea that if you look with the car perspective, a windshield perspective, to cyclists, you do not understand what's going on. If a goose would come close to a swarm of starlings, what would the goose think? The goose would probably think, what a chaos! Why are these starlings not behaving according to some logic? Why is there no leader? Why don't they follow the rules? And maybe more importantly, why is the field underneath not covered with bodies of dead starlings? They should collide. Why are they not wearing helmets? So this is why it is so important to realize that the language that we use to try to understand reality matters. It doesn't only matter to see that we do not understand certain things, it really defines the future that we're going to make. And the world that we already live in is largely formed through this utopian dream of seamless mobility. So if we talk and think about mobility as a disutility that needs to be minimized, if we see it as a system in which the machine dominates and in which the average matters, if we focus all our attention on the technology and the system, and if we change the utopia of the seamless travel, seamless mobility, then we create a reality in which the human factor is further and further reduced. Optimize the machine and marginalize the human. Well, you can say that's all nice and fine with Elon Musk. We are not doing that in cycling. Well, we are. I was not at the conference yesterday, but I'm sure that there are many ideas floating around. And I just borrowed some ideas that I see in the Netherlands popping up. Ideas of e-bikes, speed pedelecs, green waves, bicycle highways, bicycle superhighways, super cycle highways, hyper super cycling highways, hyper super cycling highways. It's not a bad idea in itself, but we should question the language that it sort of supposes, that faster is better, also for cycling. Maybe there's a different language possible. If we go and look at the swarm itself. So would it be possible if we look at cycling itself and not trying to put on cycling the language we already used to understand driving, would it not lead to a different language? So I tried, and I want to show you a bit of that. But first, did you ever see in awe this group of birds swarming? Yeah? Did you ever ask yourself, how did they do it? And? Anybody has an answer? And it may be more important, I ask myself sometimes the question, why? Why do they do it? Do we know why? Why do starlings swarm? Yeah?
To avoid predators?
To avoid predators is one possible explanation. Well, one problem with starlings, you can't interview them. But to avoid predators is one reason to swarm. Mating is one possible reason. But the ornithologists that studied these swarms, they basically found out that there's no apparent reason. It's also, if you think about it, they often start dancing. You see them coming together in smaller groups. They form a bigger cluster. They start dancing in the evening mostly for about 20 minutes, and then they disappear again. So that it's not about food. It's not about mating per se. There seems to be some other logic. And I think the same thing that I try to do, what they try to do with starlings, I try to do with cyclists. Try to understand how do they do it and why do they do it, to see if this develops a language that we can actually use. So but the first thing that we see is that generic and average rules of behavior do not work in a swarm. You can't describe a swarm you can't describe a swarm in a generic way. You can't describe its logic. If you want to understand its logic, you have to understand the logic of the individual bird. And the individual bird follows three simple rules. And the first rule is that every bird actually wants to be in the middle of the swarm. That's the safest place. But that's by definition impossible. Every bird does not want to collide. And every bird follows the direction and speed of 6 of its neighbors. So it's quick calculation and tries to follow it, and because it's sort of a delay in calculations, the swarm magic appears. Because if a bird changes its position to be more in the middle, it also changes the conditions of all the other birds at the same time. So there's never an equilibrium. It's always moving because the birds are trying to optimize their own behavior. It looks like a game, a dance, in which each starling bases its behavior based on individual preferences and by reacting on behavior of others. That is the magic of the swarm, and that is what we call emergence. There has been a lot of study on it, and there's some. So, who of you sends Christmas cards? It's okay to show hands. Yeah? Who of you sends Christmas cards? So who of you sends Christmas cards? Okay, so Christmas cards is an example of this. Many people send out Christmas cards because to people that they expect to send them Christmas cards, because you can't wait to see which Christmas cards come in and then send them, because then Christmas is over, right? So this shows that there's many more Christmas cards are being sent than would be rational, because people start sort of to respond to expected behavior of others. Another one is if you're at the coffee later, you will find that if you're talking to somebody, you will raise the level of your voice to be understandable to each other. But by raising the voice, the general level of noise is also raised, and you have this continuous ebb and flow of sound. And another example, and we will do the test a bit later, is I hope that you will applaud for me later, and ask yourself the question, after how many times clapping do you stop? 4, 5, 6? But what you do is you respond to the general sound of the applause, and maybe you want to be a front runner, maybe you want to be the latest, but you try to sort of step out of the applause at the right time. But by doing that, you change the conditions of the other. So this is the idea of emergence, and it's very, very important to understand. So I brought a book by Thomas Schelling. He won a Nobel Prize for this, Micromotives and Microbehavior. And what he describes is, he says, in these situations, it usually, any simple summation or extrapolation to the aggregate doesn't permit any logic. To make the connection, we have to look at the system of interactions between individuals and their environment, between individuals and other individuals, or between individuals and the collectivity. Sometimes the results are surprising. Sometimes they're not easily guessed. Sometimes the analysis is difficult, and sometimes it's inconclusive. But even inconclusive analysis can warn against jumping to conclusions about individual intentions. Or jumping to conclusions about the behavior of aggregates from what one knows or can guess about individual intentions. So if you want to understand emergence, you have to go to the level of the individual. But that's impossible in traffic engineering, because we started out with the language of the Homo economicus. So this is a loop that will not solve itself. But this shows that this idea, also again by Thomas Schelling, that if you look at traffic, this cannot work. Because all these people are homo economicus, they're only trying to maximize their own utility. They're not interested in the utility of others. They're not looking at the behavior of others, they just want to have the right of way. Again, that's the theory, the language that's behind how we organize our streets. And also importantly, they cannot exchange information. So if you go back to Thomas Schelling, he already looked at traffic, and he writes at page 30, the market for right-of-way at an intersection will always fail because drivers of competing cars and trucks have no way to communicate offers and agreements. They will always end up in a prisoner's dilemma, where they want to optimize their own behavior, and if they both want to do that, they will reach a suboptimal result. They will never solve the system goal of keeping the system flowing. The solution to this, if you go to YouTube and watch this movie, the general solution to this of traffic engineering is we have to make the traffic lights smarter. We have to outsmart this. We have to bottom top down put communication rules and interaction rules on top of the system to make sure that people will escape the prisoner's dilemma. And a very good example from the Netherlands, which is going viral all the time, is the rain sensor that we came up with a traffic light, that when it rains, it switches to a different routine where cyclists have more green time, which in itself sounds like a brilliant idea. But the question is, why can we not, as humans, give people that are in the rain right of way? Why is it that we think that we cannot do that? Why do we think that the technology needs to be optimized and the human marginalized? Because if you look at cycling, something magically happens. Because what we see here is also a human-machine hybrid. But here, 85% of the machine-human hybrid is human. So now we can actually try to understand what the human element does to traffic. And what you see here is two very important elements. One is that these people on the bike are very open for communication. They can send offers and agreements. They can use all their senses to send information and to receive information. So that's one. And two, they have a machine that allows them to directly control and put this information that they get into action. And this allows them to, this precise control, this allows them to optimize their own behavior, but also optimize the system goal. So, welcome to human life, where the machines are gone. Don't get distracted by the beautiful forest, and there's also bird sounds in this video. Instead, look closely, or I can use the sound. Look closely at the interactions, because what you see here, when machines are minimized, you can see how individuals can optimize their own goals and support the overall system. There are ongoing, very subtle exchanges of information going on. Offers and agreements are reached, and these offers and agreements, if you look at it, go way beyond homo economicus. Of course, some of these people follow a relatively aggressive strategy, but never too aggressive, because they know that this will not work. They got feedback before that this will not work. There's also an abundance of acts of kindness and courtesy. There's lots of people that are very altruistic in their behavior as well. It's a bird. What you see here, I think, what traffic engineers would call conflicts, these are not conflicts. This is a language issue as well. It's not a conflict that you see, it's friction. It's friction that's continuously solved by people, and they create sort of a solution maybe already 100 times before they reach their first cup of coffee. So what we saw here in this movie, again, is emergence. People have a sort of feeling of average behavior. It's very, very good to see if one person starts to give directions, like signaling with their hands, other people start doing it as well. If a person jumps a red light, other people start doing that as well. So people really respond in this situation to each other's behavior. They can do it a lot of times. So they, as I said, before I reached my first coffee, I already did this negotiation in Amsterdam a couple of hundreds of times, where you have to negotiate with other people. So you quickly learn, you get feedback, what works and what doesn't. The impact is very low, so you create conditions that this emergency can be learned by doing, even by small children, which makes it a very ideal situation that small children can have a sense of autonomy. They can go into the swarm, And they figure it out. Actually, you can see this in the morning peak hour. There's lots of school children going to school within this chaotic situation, and it works out fine. And even, so this is a sped up, of course. We cycle fast in Amsterdam. So this is a situation, very badly designed intersection in Amsterdam. Important here, there's sharp teeth here, so there's the direction, the right of way is from this side. But what you see here is cyclists start to dominate on a badly designed intersection. The traffic lights are out. They are also, there's an error today. What you see is that even the cars start to join the dance. Clumsy, very wood-like, but they start doing it. And they are not claiming right of way, so you get all this interaction going. And also this place you can see that there is a certain form of emergence. So the swarm reached the point where they dominate the logic of the street. So now the question is, can we also use this as a starting point of our design? So we started doing that together with Copenhagenize. We did a study of 10 intersections in Amsterdam. This is an example of this. This is designed as an ideal intersection in Dutch standards, but what you see here is that there's too little space at the front of the traffic light to wait. And then you see people doing all kinds of crazy things. And the traffic engineer would say, these are conflicts, we need to give them a penalty, or we need to design it differently, so that people do not do this anymore. So people are doing actually quite dangerous behavior, but they do it sort of to solve the issue of the traffic light here. Because if you would stand here 6 abreast, much more people can go through the green lights than if you don't do that. So the swarm actually makes the intersection function better. So what if we design for that? So on the left you see the old, and there's one very central element I want to get out of this, and this is what was designed before. You have a bidirectional bicycle path. Of course, you make 3 meters, 3 meters. It makes sense. But what they did on the right, by looking at the behavior here, they decided to make the design different. This is called the bag of fries now. And in the bag of fries, you actually look at this behavior of the swarm, and you try to design the intersection in such a way. So this very simple element of putting this line here, 6 meters, 2 meters, instead of 4 meters, 4 meters, because we got a bit more space, would not make a lot of sense in old traffic engineering terms, but it makes a lot of sense if you look at the emergent behavior of the swarm. One step further, if you do this in time, this is an intersection in Amsterdam where we did not change the physical design, but we shut down the traffic lights. There's a lot of cars, trams, tourists, cyclists, and pedestrians here, so many people thought that this would be mayhem. But what you see here, if you look at above with traffic lights and below without, what you see here is that there is a certain flow of things. So the stop and go at the top is replaced by a flow. And what the alderman, when we asked him to reflect on this, what he saw was that he said, people no longer behave like traffic zombies. They become very aware of each other, because to keep this flow going, you have to look at each other. You have to exchange even smiles with this person in the car, or with another cyclist, so to allow to negotiate rules. Because here as well, there are sharp teeth, but many people ignore them in positive and negative ways. So this brings me to the end of my talk. And these are also 2 very extensive talks that I had to condense in 1 sheet each. Because what we studied here was this idea of why. So now we know how. Now we know how the cyclists behave, they interact, they dance, and so on and so forth. Makes sense. But still the question that remains open is why? Why do they do it? Or why should we care that they do it? Why should we tell our aldermen to also create conditions for this? So what we did, we studied the literature, and we looked at what kinds of elements of societal strengths are linked to this type of behavior. And then, for instance, again, see it as something like there's 2 possible futures. One where everybody is in self-driving cars, the other one where people are in these kinds of spaces having all this friction on the way. So seamless mobility, meaningful mobility, right? So we studied the literature, we found all kinds of things. One of the things that's not even in here is this idea of autonomy of children. So Dutch children are ridiculously autonomous. At the age of 8, they go to school themselves, which frees up time in the day for parents, also for the children, and they develop a very strong sense of ownership of what they do with their lives. Especially adolescents in the Netherlands are adolescents are never happy, but they are less unhappy than other adolescents. And again, it has to do with the sense of autonomy. They can just explore the city because it is a safe space for them. But what we did in this paper, we looked at this idea of potential exposure to diversity. The idea that if you're in these negotiations, you do these negotiations, this dance, you dance basically with people outside of your circle. I do this dance in Amsterdam, and I would meet famous people, also tourists, everybody. And this develops all these kinds of important elements of society. You feel part of a group, you have a sense of belonging, a sense of community. You create a sense of place. You know other people, you develop trust. Prejudices go down if you do this more. And even things like political participation. If you make people in traffic space, in public space, active citizens, this will have direct results for how these people behave in the long run. And there's not a direct causation that if you turn off the traffic lights, the next day people will start behaving differently. But if you treat them in traffic space in the other way, if you take away the communication, this will definitely not happen. And the other one, this is also a complete lecture, and I promise you to end in neurobiology. This is a slide I borrowed from the famous professor Mihai Csikszentmihalyi on flow theory. Because what we also found is there's a community outcome of this, but there's also a personal outcome. Because what we find in the Netherlands is that doing this game, people are very attentive, they're really in the moment, but they're also very relaxed. If you look at videos from intersections, the Dutch have a very relaxed facial expression, well, they're in this chaos. How can it be? And this explains, this theory explains what happens there is that people are in flow. They have a certain match between the skills that they have on the bicycle and the challenges that they have in doing the dance. And they reach a certain personal flow state, and that, for instance, leads to creativity. So, dear Alderman, do you want to have a creative city? Changing the language might raise completely new questions. Everybody that plays a music instrument knows this. This is what your teacher does if you're learning to play guitar. It's putting you continuously in flow so that time goes quicker than you can imagine. Okay. So my main message is that we need to be more reflexive on how we use our language, how we use jargon, concepts and metaphors. Because I think it's powerful to understand what's going on, but it's even more powerful if you can use this as a weapon to change, to come up with an alternative language, and to through that, create alternative futures. Be aware of that if you look at these pictures and look in awe. Be inspired, copy it, especially in contexts that are heavily car-dominated, but the Dutch are at the point where this breaks down. So they have to start singing a different tune. But also for you, I think it's important, because it can already be a powerful weapon to change the language and open up opportunities for change. Language matters. It provides us a necessary simplification of reality, as I agreed with you upon with the English language, but it also blinds us for specifics of that reality, always. That's for the goose and for the machine, but also for the swarm and for the human. We need to be aware of this and play with it. And we need to be aware that current traffic language around the world is strongly linked to the logic of the car. That's often implicit, but often also very explicit in tools that we use, in traffic models that we apply, and in policy information that is used by politicians. This is strongly rooted in machine land. Being underweight has a disability that needs to be minimized or made less uncomfortable. If we really want a transition to a better mobility reality, if we want to move away from the ultimate goal of seamless travel and embrace the idea of social friction and meaningful mobility, it is not enough to change the answers. And it's even not enough to change the questions. Instead, we should change the fundamental choices that are represented in an underlying language. Only then it will become apparent that our cities do not need driverless cars, they need more carless drivers. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Social fiction.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thanks. It's mind-blowing in many ways. And I was thinking, when I saw those pictures, how many accidents are there in Dutch traffic? Between cyclists and cars? cyclists and buses.
And why is that a relevant question?
Because I got afraid when I saw them.
You got afraid?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, well, one thing of the swarm is that as the goose would be very afraid to enter the swarm of starlings. It looks very aggressive from the outside. It's actually very embracing from the inside. So it depends really on what you call an accident. But accidents with injuries are very, very limited. So this is the safest traffic environment in the world. So we actually recently spent some time with a Dutch television group, and we stood in the middle of a shared space where ferries were disembarked and embarked, and it was, for them, it looked like chaos. And after half an hour standing there, I asked them if they realized that in that half an hour, nobody shouted at each other, there were no accidents, and actually, if you start looking at it, lots of people smile to each other. They nod, they greet. So we should not only focus on the accidents, but also on what kind of positive things happen, what kinds of new bonds are being made across networks.
And I was trying to see if I could see any, let's say, 30-plus male cyclists in spandex.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see much of it.
I'm one of them, sometimes, in the weekends. Yeah. So,
then we're not cycling in the city centres, probably.
No, exactly, that's one of the points. We are also, as I said, it's not reflected upon, so we just start reflecting on what's happening. And one of the things that we found recently is indeed this strange thing that Dutch bikes are sitting upright, which is aerodynamically the most stupid thing to do. So speed apparently doesn't matter. There's other reasons for it, and we don't know. So even the companies that made them, Gazelle and others, world famous, they don't know the answer why the Dutch do that. But one of the things that you now do it, because sitting in that position, and not in this position, allows you to have much more information input, because your peripheral view is much larger, and that's where all the information comes in. And the back pedal brake helps you to do the dance much more eloquently. And one of these things that I found out, that if you have hand brakes, and if I brake, the information I send to others is very limited. But if I have a back pedal brake and I brake, everybody sees that I'm braking. And that's what you see in Amsterdam. For instance, e-bikes are also almost not present in the city of Amsterdam.
So that's amazing.
Yeah, it's very interesting to look at it in this way. The whole point of the story is that we fail to ask even these questions of how this is functioning because we did not have the language for it. So if we change the language, we suddenly start asking very different questions.
And speaking of questions, I have a couple of questions from Slido. What do you think needs to be in place before changes like this can be done safely? There are certain parts of Dutch traffic culture that we lack here in Norway.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Well, I think obviously we need to have a much more healthy mix of people outside of cocoons. Because if you're inside a cocoon, you can't do this. It's even if you want to in a car, it's very, very hard to do so. So you can only do this at places where people are outside of cocoons, where motorized traffic is also limited because of this direct control thing. So you need to have spaces, but you have spaces where you can start probably, where pedestrians are overwhelmingly the majority. If you start counting, which we often don't, around shopping malls, often at intersections, if you just start counting, pedestrians outnumber car drivers, but they are not taken care of in the logic. They have to wait, they cannot jaywalk, they have to wait for the green light. So you can change already the logic of thinking over there. So you can do it in pockets to change this culture. Because culture is not a given. I was not born with a cycling gene or something.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure. Because even I moved in the Netherlands to different places, and I had to get used to this logic in Amsterdam, and I think it formed me at the same time. I don't believe in culture as something fixed. I think it can change. And I think cycling, or at least meeting each other in public space, is seen by many as the most important way that cultures can actually change.
One last question. Is successful cycling incompatible with autonomous driving?
Yes.
Short and sweet. So, Marco, you've given this to the other presentators. This is a local product. It's honey in small jars, different honey types. And I think that could also, I guess probably that's even better here in Norway because we are so stressed and always on the run, so we need to sort of heighten the blood sugar level.
Yeah.
You can use it as well.
Yeah, thanks.
Back in Netherlands.
Thank you very much.
So, well, thank you. And a last applause for Marco.